And I will now share the images and I will now share the images and I will now share the images and
I'll let people in now.
And you're aware there's a lag of some kind?
yeah.
Annette, you are muted. We can't hear you.
I muted myself because there's a bit of feedback loop on the YouTube. So I'm just going to share these images if I can.
Just give me a thumbs up, Annette, when you want me to commence.
Can you see the? I don't think you can you?
I can see you.
Can you see the images?
I can indeed. Oh, I can't see the images. But I can...
PowerPoint images?
No, we could see them for a moment. They've gone now.
Okay, sorry.
But just a broad suggestion that we forfeit the YouTube live stream if we have to.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, all
very
good.
clear.
So here is the first image that we'll just basically flick through these fairly quickly as they will be shown again towards the end, at the very end of the webinar. So these are just some ideas of ways in which people can engage having attended this webinar.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's all of them, and we'll show these again later. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Annette, would you like me to
Yes, you're
started.
right to start now, Kelly.
Welcome, everyone. Good evening. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, in my case, the Wanneroo people.
All right, it is working.
Fantastic. I might just ask before I keep going for everyone to just check that they're on mute. If you could have a little look for the red microphone, make sure there's a line through it, just so we don't have any interruptions to the speakers. Fantastic. In my case, the Wanneroo people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. My name is Kelly Tranter. I'm a lawyer and researcher and a patron of IPAN, and was the chair of the IPAN's People's Inquiry into exploring the case for an independent and peaceful Australia. I wish to thank the Australia Anti-AUKUS Coalition, the organisers of the webinar this evening, including but not limited to Shirley Winton, Bevan, Annette and others. The topic of this webinar is the dangerous world of AUKUS and US military occupation, confronting laws restricting and or suppressing protest speech and action. First, may I attempt to provide a quick overview how I see Australia's current position. I've actually tweeted this previously, but it was sort of condensing a lot of hours of thinking about the issue of AUKUS. The problem for Australia in a strategic defence alliance with the United States is that first, there is no parity of purpose in the alliance, and second, it is not a partnership between nations which truly respect the sovereignty of the other. Australia pays for the US promise of security, and you ask its Middle East allies now what that's worth. On our side, our defence forces are not just being integrated into and made interoperable with the US military machine, they are being transformed into a southern operating division of the US military that effectively can be compelled to support US military adventurism across land, sea, air, cyber, space, particularly against China. At the same time, our country is being turned into the largest and possibly most strategic US military base in the Western Pacific, Eastern Indian Ocean region. Again, the war in the Middle East demonstrates the benefit to countries housing US bases. We're not really allies of the United States. We have substantially signed away our strategic independence. We are progressively losing our military sovereignty and are at risk of being entirely subsumed by a combined military force prioritising and pursuing US interests. What we have bought into is a defensive capability that is only defensive until Washington gives the order. If the main purpose of AUKUS Pillar 1, AUKUS, was to supply Australia with nuclear subs, it would have included the usual carefully defined contractual obligations, but it doesn't. Instead, it's a wishy-washy qualified promise to us that provides the excuse for permanent US bases and for US-controlled ports, which are purpose-built to service, sustain, repair and rearm US Virginia-class submarines. And it secures access routes for the United States to operate against China. What is really interesting, I stumbled across this recently at the Sea Air Space 2025 exposition. US Congressman Joe Courtney, who we've often seen grace our screens on ABC, said, quote, "When I try to explain AUKUS to people, whether it's back home or to my colleagues in the House, you know, sometimes the most powerful sort of moment for people is to remind them that the population of Australia is roughly about the state of Texas, and to have political consensus to take on something as enormous as AUKUS is, I think, really gets people's attention. It's clear every time you talk to counterparts in Parliament, it is quite striking the consensus that exists to take on something that is hard to imagine getting that through the budget of Austin in Texas or Sacramento, which are comparable populations." The Congressman is saying that they would never get a similarly sized US population to voluntarily take on the enormous financial burden that AUKUS involves. If an American equivalent population wouldn't take on a liability of that magnitude, why are our politicians saddling us with it? Bipartisan support, as we all know, at either federal and state levels or both, is not the same as popular consensus. We've never been asked whether or not we wish to assume that burden, and if we don't make ourselves heard, we won't be. So whether it's about the eye-watering cost, the coordinated program of active concealment of details and costs from the public burden with it, which Rex would know about, the diversion of highly skilled Australians and sophisticated productive capacity to enhance a foreign destructive capacity, the problem of nuclear waste, our relinquishment of sovereignty, the militarisation of space, US assets and personnel operating on the land of traditional owners, or positioning Australia as a strategic military target, there's plenty to protest about. The Australian bases and they are the ears and eyes we provide to the United States are likely to be the first casualties of offensive missiles or defensive missiles, just as in the current war against Iran. While the US sits in safety thousands of kilometres from the conflict zones it creates. My concerns are common concerns, which no doubt is why this webinar and its impressive lineup of speakers has generated an incredible amount of interest. I think it was 670 people have registered this evening. The aim is to conclude this webinar by 8:15 because our speakers and yourselves, no doubt, have other commitments to attend to. Our panellists this evening will be speaking for 10 minutes each, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. So please place your questions in the chat box on your screen. If you haven't already done so, now is the time to check that your computer is on mute. Our first speaker this evening is Senator David Shoebridge. David is a prominent figure in the Australian political landscape. He serves as a member of the Australian Greens and was elected to the Senate as the party's lead candidate in New South Wales at the 2022 federal election. His political philosophy centres around social justice, public accountability, environmental protection, drug law reform, and the right to protest. He has been outspoken against the AUKUS Security Pact and the acquisition by Australia of nuclear submarines. I would also add that he's one of the most effective questioners in Senate estimates, and we're very lucky to have him there to help hold the government to account in relation to defence and foreign policy issues. David will be speaking on federal legislation, including the ASIO Amendment Bill, and organising for a public response. As David has to leave before the full Q&A session, the organisers have allowed for a 5-minute Q&A session for him at the end of his presentation. David, welcome, and over to you.
Oh, thanks very much, Kelly, and thanks so much for the Coalition for pulling together this seminar. I am sorry I have to duck out of a prior commitment with our Greens groups, where no doubt we'll be talking about organising against AUKUS, amongst many other topics. But I'm coming to you today from beautiful Gadigal land in Sydney, and paying our collective respects to First Nations peoples who, I've got to tell you, have been on the front line fighting AUKUS, fighting militarism, fighting the nuclear fuel cycle and the waste cycle. And as part of our struggle against AUKUS and the toxicity that it brings to our politics and our country, we need to make sure that we are those allies with First Nations peoples protecting their land and country and water, because it really needs to be that collective struggle. So look, there are many things to talk about on AUKUS. We could talk about the appalling decision that led to AUKUS. No cabinet brief, no detailed case study, no business case. The fact that our government was signed up to AUKUS without any of those documents. The fact that in opposition, Anthony Albanese, Penny Wong and Richard Marles were walked into a 2-hour no docs briefing by Scott Morrison of all people, and were persuaded after 2-hour PowerPoint with Scott Morrison to sign us onto AUKUS. Like, I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. The fact that we're not going to get the submarines, the fact that we're putting a huge amount of money into the US and UK industrial base, the fact that we are, by doing that, surrendering our sovereignty paying hundreds of billions of dollars, even if it works, for a handful of nuclear submarines that only make sense if they're being used as a small part of a broader US deployment into the waters of the South China Sea and surrounding China. Like, you know, all of that incredible misapplication of enormous amounts of our public wealth, misapplication of our security expenditure, tying us into the United States, not creating the sovereign asset. All of that is reason to oppose AUKUS and push for an independent and genuinely peaceful and secure foreign policy. But aside from that, what we also see with AUKUS and the ideology behind AUKUS is we see also a dangerous attack on our own democracy and civil rights here. And I suppose that's one of the things that is core to this seminar, to have a look at, once those decisions are made, to ignore public opposition, to ignore our own democratic rights, to subsume our country's defence, our huge amount of our public wealth within a global US military deployment. It also turns out you need to put in place a whole bunch of laws to keep our population in order and in check, and to stop them protesting, and to stop them actually organising resistance to this. And we have seen that play out. Now, of course, you know, we have been watching AUKUS unfold at the same time as we've been watching the international order really fraying, being ripped apart in significant part by the United States. We have seen a genocide play out in Gaza in plain sight. And as that has played out, and as our government's active complicity in that genocide, failure to resist that genocide, the following of Washington's lead on that genocide has played out, we have seen hundreds of thousands, millions of Australians organising in opposition to that. And, you know, one of the moments I think I will, you know, forever remember in politics is being part of 300,000+ Sydney-siders and others walking across the Sydney Harbour Bridge against the genocide and calling for a free Palestine. And the movement that generated, that free Palestine movement generated, with huge marches in Melbourne, mass gatherings across the country in opposition to the government, it frightened governments, state and federal. And they have been organising and resisting to try and shut down public dissent. We then saw the appalling Bondi shootings, the anti-Semitic Bondi shootings in December, and the federal government, their backers in Washington, the pro-Israel lobby, said, okay, here is a moment where the federal government can now start cracking down on protests, start giving extended powers to the federal government that they have been wanting to do to take on mass movements. And I think it was fairly obvious what that legislation was intended to do. Of course, there should have been a national response. Of course, we need fact-finding. Of course, we need to do what we can to ensure that all communities are safe from violence and threats of violence. But if you remember what happened in the weeks that followed, the appalling political weaponising of those events directed at the Free Palestine movement without a shred of evidence connecting the two. Indeed, quite the opposite. The Free Palestine movement was a movement of liberation based on peace and non-violence and opposing violence, the exact opposite of what occurred on Bondi. But that didn't trouble our political, I will call them the war parties, the Labor Party, the Coalition and One Nation in the federal parliament. That facts didn't trouble them. And so we had rushed into the federal parliament some what were called anti-hate laws. Now, those laws were designed to create new hate speech laws, criminalise hate speech, and they were designed to also provide extraordinary new powers given to ASIO and the Home Affairs Minister to ban organisations in the country. We resisted both elements of that. And we weren't the only people resisting both elements of that, because we could see the way in which these laws were drafted. The hate speech laws, to criminalise hate speech laws, were drafted expressly only to protect one religion, in this case Judaism. Expressly done to do that. Expressly drafted to not protect other religions, not protect followers of Islam, not protect Christians, not protect other religions. And we saw the way in which the laws that were being crafted to criminalise organisations had the same fundamental flaw: to pick out only one religion, only one community, provide bespoke protections for that, and fail to protect and consciously and deliberately exclude protections from other parts of the community. Now, that national resistance meant that the criminalising hate laws were eventually pulled, but the powers to criminalise organisations were rushed through Parliament, barely 48 hours of public notification, and they have now given unprecedented powers to the Home Affairs Minister, on the advice of ASIO, to literally criminalise any organisation they choose if they think that organisation is attacking social cohesion. The Attorney General was asked 3 times in the lead up to that legislation, will this be used to target the Free Palestine movement? And she refused to exclude that and left it very open. And indeed, when you read the second reading speeches, you see the debate that happened in Parliament. It was clearly targeted at the Free Palestine movement. Why was it targeted at that? Because it was a movement that was being organised to resist a war, a genocide that was being funded and fuelled and supported by the United States. And I think we should be absolutely clear about that. And of course, ASIO is not a neutral player in this. ASIO is one of those federal agencies who is exclusively oversighted by members of the Liberal Party and Labor Party. They refuse to allow Greens and others to be a part of the key bodies that oversight ASIO. ASIO has a long history of being opponents to left-wing organising, and as we know, ASIO has close institutional ties with the United States through Five Eyes, and through the United States and directly with Israeli security agencies. This is not a neutral player. There's no court oversight. There's no independent review. That legislation is now on the books. That is, I don't know about you, I find that frightening. I find it frightening with a Labor government. And I can tell you, if there's a change of government, if we have some version of one nation in the mix, imagine how they could politicise and appallingly use that laws. The federal Labor government has also now been rushing through extended powers to give ASIO even broader secret questioning powers, to allow ASIO to literally whisk anyone off the street, whether or not they think that they are involved in a criminal activity, if they think they may have information to assist them, and have 24 hours of secret questioning. Again, they're giving broader scope to ASIO to whisk someone off the street if they think they'll have evidence that might allow them to track down people who are threatening social cohesion. These are incredibly dangerous powers in a democracy, and we see them playing out, and we should not pretend that they're not going to be weaponized against those of us organising against the US alliance, organising to end US bases, organising to end AUKUS, because it's the same political basis that they're grounded in. And why should we be doing this? Well, of course we should be organising against it. Right now, Australian taxpayers have been billed $9 billion to build the United States a nuclear submarine base off Perth that'll be up and running in 2027. Right now, state and federal governments are eyeing up the East Coast to build another US nuclear submarine base here. We already have a base in Pine Gap. We have US nuclear capable bombers in Tyndall. We have Northwest Cape. We are increasingly being owned by the United States, and we need to organise now to separate ourselves from the United States for a free Palestine, for an independent foreign policy that doesn't involve us in the next US war, so as we're not part of a US war against China, which would be incredibly dangerous for our region, for our economy, of course also for the people of China and the United States. There are so many reasons to do this, and that is why we need to keep the resistance happening. And I will just finish with this. It's not just legislation that's being done at a federal level. They are organising police resources to meet it as well. And I know Rex will speak about this in a bit, the new AFP command that's been established to police not just AUKUS bases, but people organising against AUKUS, an Australian Federal Police Command. And we just got answers on notice today, Rex, you will be disturbed to hear, that say that the government has budgeted $200 million for that AFP Police Command to police AUKUS just over this financial year and next financial year. Literally, I just saw those answers arrive in my inbox 2 minutes before this presentation started. Thanks everyone for being here. We have a country to organise, to maintain the independence for. We are holding AUKUS seminars around the country. Every time we hold an AUKUS seminar, we have 100 to 200 people turn up in real life, hundreds more turn up online. There is a thirst for information about this and how we can organise against this. We have an AUKUS seminar if you're in Sydney, in Parramatta on Saturday. You can find out the details of that on my social media feed. We'd love to see you there. Be part of this grassroots movement that is growing around the country and saying no to US wars, no to being not an ally of the United States, but a hostage of the United States, no to US bases, no to AUKUS, and yes to an independent and peaceful Australia. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, David. I just wanted to get a sense. I know we've got 5 minutes for questions to come in. I just wanted to kick that off by saying, look, what does bipartisan support look like from your perspective on the inside? And do you think that politicians get a sense of the public opposition that is brewing on the ground? And do you think there is any skerrick of doubt in their minds that if things were put up to a conscious vote, they might, take a different position on AUKUS? Is it just a,
Well, there's a sort of a collective refusal to look at reality on this, and it comes to mind in February of this year, I was about to have Senate estimates again next week where we'll be questioning bureaucrats about why, for example, we're spending $11 billion extending the life of a bunch of aging Collins-class submarines so as they can, bridge the gap between now and whenever these unicorn nuclear submarines will turn up. We'll be asking questions about all of these matters. But when you're in there and you're watching what the Coalition and One Nation and Labor, it's not just Labor and the Coalition. One Nation is hot to trot on AUKUS and the US alliance in the same way, uncritical way. They can't seem to conceive that the world has fundamentally fractured and changed. I mean, I remember Senator Michaela Cash, a far-right Coalition senator, but very prominent in the Liberal Party in this space, asking a series of questions of defence in February about, there's this terrible rupture happening in international law. There's countries that are breaching international law. There's countries that are, ignoring other people's sovereignty and threatening to ignore other countries' sovereignty. There's countries that are tearing up the international rules-based order. It's a very dangerous world. We need to be organised against that. And this questioning went for quite a long time with a senior defence bureaucrat. And I'm listening to that, thinking of Trump had just kidnapped the leader of Venezuela, had threatened to invade Greenland, was doing illegal and continues to do sink boats illegally on the international waters, was threatening war against Iran. The war had not yet started. Like, all of this was happening. And I remember saying, you must be talking about the United States, creating all these threats. And they looked at me like I'd done a fart in the elevator, right? And they said, well, of course not. It's China. It's China that's the threat of breaking international law and invading other countries and, ignoring sovereignty. And, that they refuse to look at the world as it is, because I think their careers, their political history, their post-politics career are all tied to this, the Washington consensus, the Washington gravy train, the billions of dollars attached to this.
And we're getting quite a few questions about the question on notice, as you can imagine, David, the $200 million spend on the AUKUS command. Do you think the public appreciate that, courtesy of Rex, the documents obtained under FOI laws by Rex, that it is in reality providing security for the protection to AUKUS standards for foreign submarines only on a permanent rotation. Do you think politicians and or the public really appreciate that it's almost sort of private security for foreign subs that will be permanently based here?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, at a federal level, they're not even looking at this. It's bizarre for you and me and those on here online, and for Rex. $200 million is an obscene amount of money to throw at something, which is really protecting US military assets. We could pretend they're UK, but the UK has no functioning nuclear submarines. It's really just US nuclear bases we're spending $200 million protecting. But they wouldn't even notice it. You know, they desperately try and not look at these figures. And of course, it's not just perimeter security that this command has been tasked with. They've been tasked with getting out and seeing if people within the community are organising against AUKUS and organising against these bases. Maybe we'll turn up and do a protest. You know, maybe we'll, organise some civil disobedience, and they want to get ahead and criminalise that and police that before it even starts. So, I do want to credit Rex for doing some of that digging and finding out, giving us some of the first warnings that what the nature of this police command was. And it goes to show how we need to be organising inside and outside Parliament, communicating closely, working together, because I can tell you now our opponents are. And they've just decided that they want to have 50 full-time AFP officers and a $200 million spend to organise against us.
And I know that you do have to wrap it up, David, but I've got some questions here about how the Greens would go about breaking the AUKUS agreement if it's ever publicly disclosed, but also if you could give maybe three pieces of advice for organisers and activists, given that the government's holding the machinery of power, the legislation, and they've got the people have only got their voices that they want to amplify, and no means with which to do so. So what would be your advice, and how would the Greens go about?
Well, I mean, the first thing I'd do is, having read the AUKUS agreement, there's a 12-month cancellation term on it, and I'd give 12 months notice and say we're cancelling AUKUS. I would stop giving them money. We'd have to give them back everything they've given us, and we get none of our money back. But given they haven't given us any submarines yet, I don't think that's a great burden. We wouldn't get any of the billions we've given to the US or the UK back. The agreement expressly says they keep everything we've given them. But we would stop hemorrhaging money to the US, industrial base. We'd stop hemorrhaging money to Rolls-Royce. We'd stop hemorrhaging the expenditure here, and we'd be able to redirect some of those billions of dollars to a defence force that was more like an echidna strategy, making Australia a spiky little echidna that protects our approaches, rather than an expensive force projection as part of the US military around the world. And, if we reimagined our defence force in that kind of prickly echidna where we weren't threatening our neighbours, but we said, actually, don't mess with us. We're spiky little echidna, but we're not going to threaten you, but it's going to be not in your interest to come and threaten us. If we started that as a trend in our region, where everyone's defence force was about a defensive force and not projecting force, it would become an incredibly positive disarmament cycle in our region and hopefully in the world. I mean, it would be an incredibly positive thing to do. And we do live in an incredibly secure geopolitical part of the world where we have enormous defensive benefits. The Pacific Ocean on one side, the Indian Ocean on the other side, the Antarctica on the, beneath us. Of course, we've got the dangerous threat of New Zealand lurking away in the Tasman Sea, but to our north, we have this massive archipelago and thousands of kilometres to the Eurasian landmass. We are incredibly well suited to defend ourselves with a defence policy that would create a positive disarmament cycle in the region. And that would be an extraordinary thing to lean into. And then we would not be dependent on the United States. We would not have to bow to the United States when it comes to policy on Gaza and Israel. And I think we would get a sense of self-respect as a country because we'd then be able to engage with the world, our neighbours as friends, the world as a place where we want to peacefully engage rather than invade as part of a US military force. I mean, I don't know about you, but that's a future I'd be happy to spend some money on.
Thank you so much, David. And are we able to get from you first, just before you go, some advice to activists, but also the document that you're referring to, the AUKUS agreement? I know there's the nuclear propulsion agreement where we've got the get out of jail free card with the 12 months. Are we able to get a link to that or make that public so people, you know,
we will share it with the organisers, and you know, the termination on 12 months. We're not stuck forever in any treaty. You can terminate pretty much any treaty. As currently, at least for the moment, a sovereign nation, we could get out of pretty much any treaty that we're a party of. But I would also say this: they want us to be frightened. They want us to be scared of the system. They want us to think that this is an impossible task. And you know, when I first picked up this portfolio for the Australian Greens in 2022, it seemed this AUKUS monolith. We would, you know, how would you defeat it? Well, I've got to tell you now that across the country, you could pretty much organise an anti-AUKUS event in any pub anywhere in the country, and you get a pretty supportive crowd cheering you on and asking you to do that. And one of the reasons is, as appalling as the world has been in the last few years, as we've watched this, you know, descent into violence, this brute force from the United States and its allies like Israel, the mask has been ripped off for many people about how the world works. And we can see now clearly how the world works, how dangerous it is to be an unquestioning hostage of a US alliance. And I think there's never been a better time to organise against AUKUS and what it stands for, organise against this, you know, not an alliance with the United States, but increasingly a hostage situation with the United States. People get it like never before. So, you know, we're holding a bunch of AUKUS forums. Follow our social media. Happy to come to that. I know others are organising in this space. And, you know, don't have to wait for us, get out and organise your own forum about an independent and peaceful Australia and how we could get out of AUKUS. We're always happy to provide information. Help the party, my party, the Greens Party across the country is committed to this campaign. You hold a meeting, we'll turn up.
David, thanks so much for your time. I'm sure I speak for others when I say thank you for your insight, your advocacy, and you're a truth custodian. And as always, we really appreciate you giving up your time. We know you're very, very busy, so I'll let you mute and go and do what you need to do. But thanks again, and we'll appreciate you sharing links to those. And
I just want to credit you for a bunch of that dogged work you're doing, getting some of those documents out and shining some of that light. And we really appreciate your work as well. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks so much. Thank you. We'll just move on to our second speaker. Our second speaker is, of course, Rex Patrick. Rex is a New Zealand-born Australian former submariner, transparency advocate and politician who represented South Australia in the Senate from 2017 to 2022. Initially elected as a member of the Nick Xenophon team, he later sat as an independent after leaving the Centre Alliance, focusing on defence policy, anti-corruption measures and government accountability, known as the transparency warrior on defence and national security. Mr. Patrick leveraged his naval background to critique major procurements, authoring dissenting reports on naval shipbuilding that highlighted timeline failures in the AUKUS nuclear pact, submarine pact, and warning it would not enhance capabilities, which is really important, within feasible delivery periods. Through his important FOI work, he has also drawn attention to the AUKUS command within the Federal Police and its public order management functions, which he will be focusing on this evening. Rex, good evening. Say hello to AUKUS command at HMAS Stirling Surf West, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm sure they're listening in. They've got their $200 million budget, as David Shoebridge has just pointed out, and I'm sure there's some overtime allowances in amongst that. Look, thank you very much for inviting me along. In some sense, I'm a bit of an oddball in amongst this crowd in that I'm a former submariner. I actually have a strong will for us to develop a sovereign and capable echidna, I think I now call it, after David's description, a defence force that really can defend Australia and contribute where we wish to contribute in terms of other areas of peace and security around the world. Unfortunately, being a submariner and someone who's been to sea on nuclear-powered submarines, I just don't think this is a sensible option for Australia. It's not sensible because actually it's not about defence of Australia. It's about contribution to the US alliance. And we're spending just so much of our budget on this one program. It's an all eggs in one basket program, except that the hens that lay some of the eggs in the US are unable to meet the demand in the US, so we won't get any eggs from the US, and the UK hen is headless. Their system is their shipbuilding sector is just a mess. Look, I do a lot of FOIs and on a whole range of different topics. There was an Auditor General's report out today about how poorly our FOI does. If I can give AUKUS credit for one thing, it's the fact that even though there are long delays in getting answers to AUKUS FOIs, this program is a 50-year program, so it almost doesn't matter. So you know, a lot of contemporary stuff, you simply don't get the answer. But for AUKUS, because it's going to be so long running, I've got a number of FOIs that are on foot, and I'll talk to you about them at the end, you know, where I'm challenging government secrecy around this program. And much of it is completely unnecessary. I, as a former submariner, I get that we don't want to tell people what the capabilities of the submarine are per se, but how much money is being spent, where they're going to put nuclear waste, where they're going to put the bases, things like that. They should not be secret. So one of the things I did FOI, I saw a passing mention of something called the AUKUS command inside the AFP. And I thought, wow, I wonder what that is. And then I made a couple of FOI requests, one to the Australian Submarine Agency and one to the Australian Federal Police. The one to the Australian Submarine Agency is still subject to review with the Information Commissioner. There are 7 documents they're simply not providing me, and I will fight that. And I'm pretty sure I'll win that particular fight. The other FOI I made about AUKUS Command went to the Australian Federal Police. They actually spent quite a considerable amount of time. I requested information from them in round about June last year, and it took forever for them to respond, but at least they produced some documents which are now in the public domain. I'm sure many of them you have seen. Now, that was about looking at what was the AUKUS command, and what those documents revealed was that there is a special command inside the AFP that now looks after AUKUS. Now, I'm sure many of you agree that if we are to get submarines, even if you don't agree with that concept, but if you are to get nuclear-powered submarines, they do have to be protected properly. So, in some sense, there is some legitimate reasoning for having people focusing on protection of nuclear assets. I think that's a reasonable thing. But the documents show that the breadth of the task of the AUKUS command and indeed its a reach beyond simply AUKUS was something that really wasn't well advertised. So we heard David talking about the anti-protest role, and it's clear in the documentation that that is one of the functions of the AUKUS command, is to deal with protests over AUKUS. But it also expands to, the documentation showed it also expanded to other places like Pine Gap, other places where we might have US forces or US facilities here in Australia. And in general, my observation, having read some of the documents, was much of it was about also saying to the US and to the UK as part of the AUKUS program, don't worry, we're going to keep you all safe. I think it is, but the bottom line is, I think it's much broader than just AUKUS submarines. It's a force that will look at any time a protest intersects with the US in particular, or the UK alliance that we have in relation to defence. I don't know when I'll get the documents that are coming from the Australian Submarine Agency. They were more secretive than the Australian Federal Police. Again, we just in relation to the AFP, they did reveal that they are spending money on systems that will allow them to break up protests, and even advice in respect of things like lethal force. So it is a concern, and I think there is more work to be done in that space. And I know David Shoebridge has asked some questions. In fact, his staff has shared those with me, perhaps before David saw them. Maybe we don't tell David that, I'm sure there'll be some work that will be done at estimates in a week from now, when David questions both the AFP and indeed the Australian Submarine Agency. So people can read about what I found in respect of the AUKUS command on Michael West Media. You can just Google my name and the word AFP AUKUS command, and I'm pretty sure we embedded some of the documents within that particular story. I just want to very briefly, in the very short time I've got available, just let you know there are other FOIs that I am doing. You heard David Shoebridge talking about the treaty, which is public, but there's also an AUKUS agreement between the three countries, which I have requested under FOI and is with the Information Commissioner now. Involves some very interesting and tricky legal arguments, but I'm hoping to get access to some of that agreement. I've done a lot of work on FOIs in relation to the East Coast bases, and now the Greens are also working through the New South Wales Parliament to get documents about where they are going to put a nuclear submarine base on the East Coast. And it looks very much like Port Kembla is the preferred location. And I think we'll hear from Arthur later, a councillor from Port Kembla. I've also done a lot of. I'm also doing a lot of work on where they're going to put the nuclear waste. One of the crazy things I've just recently done is sought access to the latest cost estimate associated with storing AUKUS nuclear waste, and Defence can't, the Australian Submarine Agency can't find it. So there's a bit of a battle going on there, and I suspect that eventually they'll have to hand something to me. The Defence is not allowed to pursue a particular capability without giving cradle to grave costs right across all of the aspects associated with the program, and AUKUS waste is something that they need to cost. The other one that I'm particularly paying attention or working on is the location of where they're going to put this nuclear waste. Just so you know, the government produced a report in 2023 on how to select a location. That document has been claimed to be cabinet. I'm actually in the federal court fighting for that access to that particular document. But as part of the my strategy to get access to that, I also FOI'd all of the agencies that contributed to the document. And there's a very good decision that's just been made in the last week or so, which I've shared with the organisers, that you can have a look at, where the Administrative Review Tribunal has now ordered the government to hand over documents related to, or input documents to the cabinet submission, which I properly characterised as policy documents associated with where and how to store nuclear waste. I'm hoping we will have that available within the next 21 days. The government has a certain amount of time to appeal. The decision was pretty strong. I think it's going to reveal some very interesting stuff that keeps the conversation going, keeps the dialogue alive. So lots and lots of stuff happening in the FOI space. I continue to work in background to try and get access to information that helps to contribute to the public debate on whether you are for or against AUKUS. In a democracy, we need to have access to information so that we can discuss the merits of any particular program.
Thank you so much, Rex. I know we've got question time at the end for the remaining panelists, but I would be interested at the end to get your perspective on the stakes being really high for the United States, obviously with this arrangement. And I'm wondering whether you think, given your experience, whether the AUKUS command really feeds into a concern or worry about what happens here may create a reluctance in other countries to accept US subs in their ports as a result of either nuclear incidents or public backlash, and whether that would create a bit of a domino effect, and whether that would perhaps feed into the US thinking on the AUKUS standards for security.
I think actually any incident, any problem that takes place with US submarines or Australian submarines with that have come from the US will have an effect on how things are viewed around around Australia, around the United States, and in the region. And that's part of the reason why in the documents that I got in respect of the AUKUS command, there's clear evidence that part of this is about making the US feel comfortable that when there are US submarines in Australia, not only will the Royal Australian Navy operate or protect them on their bases, not only will the police will also have a force that is able to protect them, and that if we eventually get these unicorn submarines, as David Shoebridge calls them, that we will be also making sure that they're operated safely, and that, again, there are no protests in respect of Royal Australian Navy submarines either.
And of course, concealing from the public what's actually occurring on those bases is a pretty substantial part of the equation. Rex, thank you. And I'll at the end, I'll also ask, obviously, what you think the alternative to nuclear subs is, what we should be campaigning for. I'll move on to our third speaker this evening, a lawyer and investigative journalist, Nick Hanna. I'm sure many of you have seen his face on the television and his podcast. Nick has acted in various high-profile civil liberties cases in New South Wales, including the constitutional challenge of the Minns government's anti-protest laws. He hosts The What and the Why, an investigative journalism project exposing the role of the Israel lobby in undermining democratic rights in Australia. Tonight, Nick will cover New South Wales legislation, the impact of protests against AUKUS in the context of the overall erosion of democratic rights, and organising and collective responses to these laws and fighting funds. Nick, congratulations to you, to your team and to your clients for your recent important win in the New South Wales Court of Appeal. Over to you.
Thanks, Kelly, and hello, everyone. I've been asked to speak about New South Wales protest laws. I'll try to make it as relevant as I can to AUKUS, and there is obviously a very close relationship between the undermining of our civil liberties and this alliance with the US. As US imperialism becomes increasingly unhinged and brazen, we are seeing a rise in the opposition to the US and to US militarism across the world. And Australia is no exception. In Australia, the opposition to the US and the US alliance will focus on AUKUS, or at least that will be one of the main focal points. And I think for reasons that perhaps will be discussed later during the Q&A, it's not surprising why that is. I think the war in Iran has greatly elevated people's concerns about the US alliance and forced people to rethink the prudence of maintaining this relationship, because we've been told for so many decades that the only way that this country can be safe is if we have US military bases here and if we have a close military relationship with the US. But we've seen how that's played out in the Gulf, where those bases actually make those countries unsafe. Those bases are a liability. And so as we see what I expect will be a groundswell in opposition to the US, people will want to that opposition will manifest itself through protest and through people speaking out against AUKUS and against the US alliance. But our ability to engage in that form of opposition is being rapidly hindered due to mainly a legislative assault on our civil liberties. And that assault has been largely driven by the pro-Israel lobby, and it really kicked off in earnest. It's obviously there's been for decades, the pro-Israel lobby has sought to influence our government to pass laws that limit criticism of Israel. And I should make clear that it's not the only lobby group that does that. Every lobby group obviously seeks to advance its own interests, but the Israel lobby group is particularly influential, and its level of influence has increased enormously since October 2023. And since then, we have seen both the state and federal governments introduce a raft of laws that limit our ability to express political opinions and to engage in protests. And that process has accelerated rapidly since the Bondi terror attack, and we are now seeing governments pass laws that I quite frankly never imagined would be passed in this country. And it's only because they have that pretext, as I call it, of the horrific Bondi shooting of December last year. And these laws are ostensibly neutral in that most of these laws, at least, are ostensibly neutral in that they don't seek to expressly prevent criticism of Israel, but that's clearly what the main focus is. But because they are neutral, it does allow and will continue to allow law enforcement to use these same legislative weapons against other protest movements, and including the movement opposing AUKUS. And so it's important that people be aware of the laws and aware of their impact, and that we push back against them. Palestine is, of course, just the thin end of the wedge, and the assault on our civil liberties won't stop with the pro-Palestine anti-genocide movement. It will, of course, expand in due course. And if the AUKUS, anti-AUKUS movement, if I can call it that, builds up enough momentum and does start to pose a sufficient threat, then these weapons will be turned on that movement. And so it's important that we all understand that even if, regardless of your position on Palestine, I mean, imagine most people here tonight support Palestinian human rights and oppose Israel's genocide there. But even if you don't, I think you should. And you're just here because you oppose AUKUS. It's well and truly in your interest to oppose these laws, because the same laws that are being used against the anti-genocide movement now will be used against people protesting AUKUS in the future. So perhaps just to give a quick overview, I know we don't have long, but a quick overview of some of the laws that have been passed over the course of the genocide. We saw in December of last year, the Minns government, within a fortnight of the Bondi terror attack, the Minns government passed the most draconian anti-protest laws ever passed in this country. And the effect of those laws was, in summary, it's quite complicated, but in summary, it was to allow the New South Wales Police Commissioner to make a declaration that would effectively strip people who participate in protests from the normal lawful protections that they've traditionally enjoyed in this state. For example, the protection against being issued with a move-on direction or being prosecuted for minor offences like obstructing traffic or obstructing pedestrians. And we saw the pernicious effect of these laws most visibly on the 9th of February at Sydney Town Hall, when there was a mass protest against the official visit of Israeli President Isaac Herzog, and the most brutal crackdown on peaceful protesters that we've seen in this state in decades. And that law, again, ostensibly was neutral. That is, it prevented protests against or protests for any cause and for any movement, not just for the pro-Palestine movement. And whilst they were introduced, I think it's without doubt that those laws were introduced to target the pro-Palestine movement, they did have a negative impact on other movements. It affected First Nations protests. It affected a protest against the US military intervention in Venezuela and the kidnapping of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. And again, this is a law that could have just as equally applied to a protest against AUKUS. Thankfully, these laws were overturned by the Court of Appeal. There was a constitutional challenge that was brought by my clients on behalf of Black Caucus, Palestine Action Group Sydney, and initially Jews Against the Occupation 48. And though, as a consequence of that challenge, those laws have been struck down. But we should not kid ourselves. This is not the end of the Minns government's efforts to stifle the protest rights in this state. It was an important victory, but it was just one small battle in what will be, I think, a very protracted war. Now, we are seeing a similar assault in other states. Western Australia is attempting to introduce anti-protest laws. I think another speaker will discuss that. And we are seeing at the same time a severe crackdown on freedom of speech. We have seen various laws passed which limit people's ability to express their opinions. And we are seeing a weaponization of existing laws or a repurposing of those laws to criminalize political expression, particularly political expression against Israel and against the Australian government's relationship with Israel. And I'm not sure if there's time. I've got a few examples I could share the screen. How are we going for time, Kelly? I'm happy to sort of move on.
No, please share. The more information, the better, and I'll work around that.
Okay. So, yeah. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so these are just a few examples. They're mostly clients of mine, but I won't disclose any confidential information. Michael Exarian, who's the gentleman pictured here, is an artist based in Wagga Wagga, and in his shop front, he displayed this poster, which he had created, and it's about the more than 250 journalists and media workers have been killed in Gaza. And because of the text at the bottom, which you can read, he is facing a criminal hearing in July of this year. And it's not the only case that he has. He's also got another criminal hearing later this year for displaying. On the right, you can see this artwork that he displayed in his window depicting Peter Dutton, local Wagga member Michael McCormack, and the billionaires Gina Reinhart and Clive Palmer dressed up as Hogan's Heroes characters. And because that image contains the original uniforms of the Hogan's Heroes characters, which have some German World War II military symbols, he is charged and facing imprisonment for publicly displaying Nazi symbols. There was another gentleman who was charged last week. I don't know if anyone saw that. He was protesting outside the Royal Commission, and he had a T-shirt on that had a swastika with a Star of David. Whether you agree with the appropriateness of that or not, it was a peaceful form of political protest. And he is charged with the federal version of this offence, which carries a mandatory minimum jail sentence of 12 months if he's imprisoned. And that was a law that was introduced last year under pressure from the pro-Israel lobby by the Albanese Labor government, contrary to the Labor Party's own long-standing opposition to mandatory minimum sentences. Another example is this artist, James Hillier, Nordacious in Queensland. He was ordered to take down various artworks by the police because they contained the phrase "from the river to the sea," which is now a prohibited expression in Queensland. And it's if you publicly recite or display that phrase, you will be facing imprisonment. And well, there's an update about his case, but I won't break the news here. I've only just told my client, but I've had some good news about that case. But he is just one of many people that have been adversely affected by this law. There are a couple of dozen people in Queensland who have been charged for reciting that expression at a protest. I'm representing a few of them, and it is without a doubt the most draconian anti-free speech law that we currently have in Australia. This gentleman, Fouad Masri, is facing a criminal hearing later this year, sorry, because he displayed text on the forecourt of the Sydney Opera House opposing the Min's government relationship with Israel. This gentleman, Theo Nolan Isles, he did this tweet. So people are now being arrested and facing imprisonment for tweets. This was a tweet he did on the 20th of January. He spent about a month in custody before he was released on bail for this, which is clearly, in my view, was a tweet that was part tongue-in-cheek. And yeah, so here's a screenshot of an article about him being charged. And then I have another client who tweeted this meme. It's a popular meme. I'm too old to understand these things, but apparently it's a popular meme. And the trend is, it's one of those meme trends, and you replace the words Peter Parker. You see the name Peter Parker in the bottom right-hand corner. You will replace that name with people who are anyone who you don't like. And in this case, my client is alleged to have replaced the name with Anthony Albanese. And as a result, her house was raided, her devices seized, and she's now been charged and facing imprisonment for this meme. So that's just a few examples of, I'll stop sharing now. That's just a few examples of, sorry, I just need to exit out of this. There we go. Of some of the real life consequences of this crackdown on free speech. And there are also, of course, a couple of dozen people who are still facing criminal prosecution for participating in the protest against Herzog. And I've had one client whose charges have now been dropped, and hopefully more are, but there's still many more to go. So I think that really illustrates the seriousness of the predicament that this country now faces. Again, all of those examples that I've given have some connection to the anti-genocide movement, but these same laws, most of those same laws could be used against people protesting AUKUS. And so the fight against the US alliance and against AUKUS must necessarily involve a fight against these repressive laws. How do we do that? Well, it has to be a multi-pronged approach. There will be, obviously, the political approach is at the core, but we also need to support the legal pushback, and that's a great opportunity for me to end by giving a shameless plug for a pro bono law center that I've just helped establish with some like-minded lawyers. Can I have 1 minute to just talk about that, Kelly? Is that okay?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So we have just set up the Civil Liberties Defense Center, and this is just our website. We'll have a hotline for people to get free advice if they're facing legal issues, provide legal representation and assistance to people in select cases, act as a hub to refer to lawyers in other states, have community education for people about civil liberties and about new laws that undermine those civil liberties, and also engage in advocacy. And if people want to support us, I'll put a link to our Chuffed campaign in the chat. And if anyone would like to volunteer, then you can email that address, which I'll also put on the chat. Thank you. And I know I've really focused on the legal issues, but I'm more than happy to speak more about the political issues in the Q&A later if people would like.
Thank you, Nick. And just before I move on to our next speaker, I did want to ask you, a lot of that, the focus is post action. So the activist or the activists take the action and then they come and see their lawyer. So you're sort of assisting at the end. If you had that opportunity to provide advice to AUKUS activists before embarking upon action or
Yes.
non-violent civil disobedience,
Yes.
what would you say?
Yeah, fantastic question. So just sort of at a high level, because obviously I could do a whole presentation about that, but one important thing is about minimizing the risk of providing evidence, incriminating evidence to the police that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. And the main way that you can do that is not having your phone with you at the action. If you are arrested, then the police generally in most states, if not all states, have the ability or have the lawful right to seize your mobile phone. When police seize your mobile phone, it's becoming increasingly common. In fact, in New South Wales, it's pretty much the norm now that they will download the entire contents of your phone using Israeli surveillance technology Celebrite. And there is no regulation about this technology. So they will keep all of the data, all of your messages, all of your internet searches, all of your location data, everything. I've got a whole, if you want to go to the What and Why YouTube channel, I've got a whole video about it. And it is, not only will they get evidence about the protests that you've engaged in, for example, messages with your comrades organizing the protest, etc., your location data, but they'll also be able to potentially uncover evidence of other offences. And when I say offences, obviously I'm primarily speaking about political offences, but it might be something else. I think all of us have things in our phone that we wouldn't like the police seeing. And so it's really important, I think, not to have your phone with you or to have a second phone that you use for protests. It's also really important that, and this is such a common mistake that I'm still seeing people, that there really should be no excuse in 2026. We are not careful enough with our communications. A lot of people are still making calls using the normal phone app and not using end-to-end encrypted apps. The best one to use, mainstream app, I think, is Signal. That's what I recommend for both messages and calls because it's default encrypted. If you're not using an encrypted app, and for example, you're just sending normal SMS, I can guarantee you, if you're involved in political activism, your messages are being intercepted and stored, being picked up and stored by 1, 2, 3, or potentially more countries' intelligence agencies, right? NSA, Unit A200, possibly ASIO or the Australian Federal Police. So please don't use SMS or normal calls. Use apps with end-to-end encryption. And if you're involved in sensitive matters, use the auto-delete function. It's much more difficult for the police or authorities to recover messages which have auto-deleted using that function. There's a lot more that I could talk about, but yeah, I could. There's probably enough for now. But just keep an eye out. The CLDC, one of the main things we'll be doing is giving seminars about these sorts of topics, how to protect yourself before you get in trouble, because it's usually much more difficult to get yourself out of trouble than to prevent yourself getting into trouble in the first place.
Thanks, Nick. That's very sound advice. And it's obviously the subject probably of another webinar. And thank you for all of your important advocacy and work. I know what a difference it makes to people on the ground. Obviously, I'm a lawyer, so I can see the difference that you're making to people who need access to that sort of information when they're acting on their conscience and participating as they should for equality and against injustices. So, We are very grateful for all of the work that you do. I'll move on to our next speaker. How we're going for time, 7:42. Okay, our fourth speaker this evening is Arthur Roris. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Arthur. Arthur is the Secretary of the South Coast Labor Council. The SCLC is the peak union body representing 25 affiliated unions from the Illawarra to the Victorian border in the south, including the industrial heartland of Port Kembla and Wollongong. Arthur was elected as secretary in March 2000 and previously worked with the CPSU, the Department of Employment, Education and Training, and in casual teaching and research positions at the University of Wollongong in politics and industrial relations. In his role as Secretary of the South Coast Labor Council, he has been a leading campaigner for green jobs, climate action, and a nuclear-free future and the movement against AUKUS. Arthur, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Can you hear me okay there? Is that travelling?
We sure can. We can certainly hear you.
Okay. Look, thank you for the introduction and for putting this on. There is a lot of interest, obviously, not just seen by the numbers here tonight, but obviously anyone tracking media at the moment, social and otherwise, will know that people are starting to tune in to engage. I'm going to try and abridge this as much as I can because I know we're probably a little bit over your times that you had suggested ambitiously earlier, I think. But let me just start with a question of scope. For most people, when this deal was announced, they believed it was about submarines. That's what they thought this was. This was a deal about submarines, and the contention was initially about them being nuclear, whether we needed that, and then it became a question of, well, the cost, and then the questions of sovereignty and other things started teasing out. I'm not saying for people here, I'm saying more broadly, if we could get into average Australia here in terms of the average living room, that's the situation. In our area, it was a little different in that the previous Liberal government that announced it, Scott Morrison, actually named 3 East Coast bases where these submarines would, at least for some time, be home birthed, I say, sort of tongue in cheek. But that was it. And here on the South Coast, though, people started thinking about what this means. The first thing is that we said from the start, and I think we pretty much succeeded in convincing the locals, we had about 4,000 people on the street in Port Kembla on a May Day, specifically on this issue. That was a shot over the bow, basically to say, we know what you're up to, and it's not just about submarines. They were looking at something much bigger. By much bigger, we said at the time, and we maintain now, it was about establishing a United States base here on the East Coast. The numbers didn't add up then, and they certainly don't add up now. You don't go through all of this for 2 or 3 nuclear submarines that at some time will be berthing into the port. What has happened, I'm going to skip forward a little to give a bit of context to this now. Some of the good work that was done by Abigail Boyd, a Green Upper House MP in New South Wales, much to the opposition of the New South Wales Labor government, they were able to demand the release of the AUKUS files, as we've dubbed them now, which were looking at that question about AUKUS and what it means practically in terms of an East Coast base. So when these files dropped, surprise, surprise, they confirmed what we had all collectively been saying from the start. Let's start with the question of scope. I'll run through these fairly quickly. There were some surprises in there and a little bit of stupidity, frankly, on the part of the consultants, but we'll get to that. The first is the question of scope and the scale. 3 submarines, 4, 5, 6 submarines? Yeah, like hell. They're talking about a 4,000 to 5,000 visiting personnel. That's just visiting sailors and their families, which they have to accommodate, and preferably to find jobs for their spouses as well. This is Wollongong we're talking about. They want to put this thing next to the steelworks, right? So they want to house all of these sailors. And the first question people ask is, that doesn't sound like 2 or 3 submarines to us. And of course it isn't, because as you go through the documents, and we're still only scratching the surface, there's hundreds there, you notice the other thing about scale. All of a sudden, the penny drops where they say, this is not just about a submarine port. This must accommodate a surface fleet. A surface fleet? You mean the US 7th Fleet, which is what we said at the time. They haven't denied it, mind you. In fact, we knew at the time from papers that were sent to us from the United States, they were bragging about Port Kembla and how it's got great beaches and lovely girls, and the sailors will have a great time. This was at the end of 2022, early 23. Back then, they knew pretty much where they wanted to put this. It gets better. Looking through the documents, you start to realise, and this is the relevance here, because up until now we're talking about AUKUS more or less, not academically, but let's just say in a very abstract fashion of dollars and cents and potential harm. Well, what happens when you're looking at a base? It brings it home, quite literally. And this is where the question of changing laws and introducing new laws, what do they want them for? They don't want them to protect the submarines. They want them to protect the American hegemony that is being threatened here in terms of the alliance. That's what it's for. They're there to stop protests, not to protect the subs. Because as Rex said, you would imagine that they would do that in terms of, exclusion zones and other things which are a problem in themselves. Just on that point, the interesting thing to note here is they started off talking about a jetty and a few submarines. The real question is, would they really allow nuclear-capable submarines that would then be joint shared and used as well as a bit of a interoperable port by the Americans with no protection? Well, that was the other leak that came from the US. They said, we won't let those ones without support and without defense. You're talking missiles and you're all batteries, that is, and you're also talking about a jet fighter base somewhere close by. You do not allow those things unprotected. And why would you? And I think Rex made that case. So all of a sudden, this proposition's getting bigger and bigger. How big? Well, that was the sucker blow in the leaked documents that the government tried to stop us looking at. They say on the first page, more than twice the size of the Western Sydney International Airport project. Right? That is how big. That ain't for 2 or 3 submarines, can I tell you? We're talking about a full-on operation here that would involve at least other assets and the AUKUS partners. So we're getting an idea of what one of these things looks like now. So when you move through, the other interesting thing, which relates to what we're talking about today, I guess, is that they hone in on the obvious question that the locals aren't happy with this. And it's very clear. They detail, they get that bit right. They're quite accurate there. This ain't going to go down too well. So they're talking about a concept known as a WTA. And what they mean by a WTA index is a willingness to accept the shit sandwich, essentially. You've got a nuclear base, you've got threats of radiation, a nuclear target on your back, And what these guys do is they make an assessment as to the level of resistance wherever this base may be. Whilst they don't mention Port Kembla specifically, it's pretty clear what they're talking about. And they make the assessment that Kembla is going to be a rough job. These guys won't be lying down easily. So they then put a number on it and they say, they monetize it and they say, how much money would it take to buy them off? You know, and there's a housing crisis, right? And there's all of these things. They don't mention the housing crisis, by the way. They're probably adding to it. But they talk about how much will it cost to actually buy off the locals. And they'll put a figure. And I think the figure they used was $700 million collectively or whatever. They then talk about the displacement of residents from their homes and of businesses. None of this was made clear. This wasn't part of the Christmas present, right? So all of this sort of stuff comes out. And then that's when the penny dropped for us about how much resistance they really do expect and why they need some heavy duty new laws. And by the sound of it, some prepared coppers as well to try and quell this because, well, Port Kembla's got a very long history of within the peace movement, but also on social justice questions. So this is providing a bit of the context. Now, what does this actually mean? This was, as they say, in 2022, 2023. And here is the really interesting thing that hasn't really been discussed in the media. The consultants make it very clear in these hundreds of pages of documents and assessments, wherever they put it on the East Coast in New South Wales, they've got to move like yesterday. They do not have a day to spare. Even though this thing is like 2040, we've never had the nuclear submarines before. Clearly, they're talking about a massive operation. They say twice the size of Western Sydney Airport is the project. So they do not have time. They need to move quickly. How is it that straight after the big protests at Port Kembla, the screens go black and the government says, right, we're stopping right there. We do not have to make a decision till 2030. Clearly, we all recognise that as them just taking the kettle off the boil. They took it off the stove, right? And they thought that's it, we'll kill it. Because this is snowballing. The more people are finding out about this, they don't like it. Port Kembla's a rough place as it is. We'll just take it off the boil and we'll tell them we don't have to make a decision till 2030. But think about this. What on earth would it take any decision maker who knows, sorry, have I still got you there?
You have indeed, Arthur.
You can still hear me okay?
We sure can.
Okay, so I've lost the screen, but that's okay, I'll keep going. So the point of this is if you know you are more or less behind and you have got so much to do for the biggest defence project in our lifetimes, what do? Do you get cracking? Do you pick the base? Do you start building? Do you work on your logistics? Do you work on your forward planning? Do you work out your supply chains? Oh no, we're expected to believe that what you do to deliver AUKUS, this thing that no one believes we could deliver in time anyway, what you do is nothing for 7 years until 2030 when the bell rings, and then you race towards the finishing line to try and build an East Coast base. Does that seem a little strange to you? Who on earth would believe that if what you wanted to do was actually set up a nuclear base from scratch, never having done this before, your first and most considered decision here would be to do nothing for 7 years and only then make the decision? I don't think anyone believes that, seriously. But that's where we are, and that's what they expect us to believe. Just quickly, here are the problems that they really have on the ground, and I'm not even talking about the logistics and the money here. You've got the most unionised, densely unionised region in the country, number one. Number two, the electricians, they're refusing to touch anything nuclear in any way, shape, or form. The steel and the related industries in port, the existing infrastructure that facilitates heavy manufacturing, as well as the fourth largest car import facility in the Southern Hemisphere is in Port Kembla, that relies on timely movement of vessels, windows that are very short as it is, and this thing called demurrage, which they pay on the ports if they're even a day late. And one of the key things we've discovered from the new documents is these things have got to be able to operate without, quote, external interference, including vessels. How does that work in a port like this unless you're actually going to essentially take the whole of Port Kembla? And the reason I'd put to you, whether it's Port Kembla or Newcastle, that you pull the plug in 2023 and do nothing is that you're not doing nothing. You keep on planning and you try and work this out and you do the things that you need to do and you wait until a perfect time, which is usually an electoral cycle. And in this case, I'd suggest they'd announce it after the next election. That would be my prediction. There is another possibility here, and that is that the government doesn't believe it will ever have to deliver an East Coast base because even they know, and especially they know, the subs ain't coming, but they can't withdraw from here. In other words, AUKUS will only be what the United States gets out of the whole deal. We get jack shit at the end of the day, even if you believe the submarines, the nuclear submarines, were going to be helpful for us. If you follow that logic, what you would do is pretty much the same thing again. You'd say, we don't need to make a decision by 2030. If things comes good, that'll be another government's responsibility. If it doesn't, well, you know, you haven't actually gone down the path of building a white elephant. Now, we're not sure exactly which of those two. We're pretty sure it'd be one or the other there. What we do know is this, that the government is very, very scared of the response on AUKUS, and they feel that they need to actually move in a lot harder on protest. And the thing that we learned, following on from what our earlier speakers have said, you know, the thing that had the greatest impact, particularly in New South Wales, were not the laws themselves on what people actually did in terms of arrests. The biggest effect was the psychological effect on the 300,000 people who marched over the Harbour Bridge, who would be unlikely to do that now with families and others with these laws. It's that fear factor. And I think that is what they've realised may sort of work generally, but they need more than that when it comes to something like AUKUS and bases, because the stakes are a lot higher. It's one thing asking people to, you know, break the law for a cause overseas. It's another to try and stop people from defending their homes from being reclaimed by the state. They're different sort of propositions. And I think that these new laws, along with the ASIO laws, which allow them to interrogate people without lawyers present and without being able to even talk about what had happened, these things instill fear. They give a very, very heavy hand, and they're designed, I think, for some heavy duty anti sort of protest work. And that is consistent if you have a look at the public documents about the assessments they've made about opposition to some of these unpopular things, you quickly realise that they're running out of bullets, pardon the analogy. If buying off the residents with money doesn't work, what else have they got? What have they got? The only thing they've got are these laws, and I might leave it there.
Arthur, thank you so much. And I'm sure I speak for others when I say I'd love to see the documents that you're in your possession, because it's almost like this sort of material needs to be catalogued in a central website so that people can access them and pick out the patterns from area to area. And I suppose that's why it's good that we've got some other activists from different locations so that we can get a sense of what might be happening on the ground, and your insight of they're still working at mining away, and don't trust your government is an important message for all of us. I will move on because I know it's 8 o'clock, and we'll see what sort of window of opportunity we have at the end for any questions it may be that we have to cut that right back. But anyway, leave that with me. Finally, before we receive short contributions from anti-AUKUS activists on the ground, we have Jorgen Doyle. Jorgen is a freelance journalist, editor of the Militarism in the Northern Territory newsletter, Substack, and an activist. I've read quite a bit of your material, Jorgen. Jorgen is a freelance journalist and horticulturalist living in Mabantwa, Alice Springs, Central Aranda country. He writes on the expansion of US and Australian military presence in Northern Australia and is involved in local environmental justice and Palestine solidarity campaigns. Jorgen, thank you for your tireless work. It's always very comprehensive, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And yeah, thanks to everyone who's spoken so far. It's been really interesting. I feel like I could ramble, so I'll try and not do that. I think I got asked to sort of speak on policing of protest in the NT, the legal landscape with regards to protest in the NT, as well as just what's happening with perhaps protests against military installations in the NT, and what's happening with the military installations themselves. Perhaps also, I think I was prodded because I guess I've come at this stuff through my involvement in Palestine solidarity work from this place. I'm part of a group called Mbantua for Palestine. Obviously, one of the targets of our activism here has been the Pine Gap facility. And I think our group came up in Rex's FOI fishing for documents about this AFP AUKUS command. And Rex found an email from the existing AFP force at Pine Gap, talking about one of the fortnightly rallies that we'd been holding last year at the base, on the road into the base rather. And they were sort of congratulating themselves for being across our protest and knowing that it was going to happen. But that was a protest that we'd promoted all over social media and wheat pasted across town. So it was just quite funny that they were, to see that email where they were congratulating themselves. And I guess, yeah, through this, through the Palestine solidarity work here that has obviously been very focused on Pine Gap, its role in imperial violence all across West Asia, all around the world. That it's sort of from that angle that I started becoming interested in all the other ways that Northern Australia is embedded in US militarism and Australian militarism. And yeah, I started looking at other sites. So perhaps I'll just mention a few of the places that I think perhaps people outside of Northern Australia are not quite as aware of. One thing that I've been interested in and looking at is this proposed Chandler nuclear waste dump 120 kilometers south of Alice Springs on southern Aranda country, just outside of the southern Aranda community of Titchikala. The proponent for the waste dump is a private company called TELUS Holdings, a Western Australian-based company with an American former Wall Street banking CEO. They have an existing waste facility just outside Kalgoorlie in Western Australia called Sandy Ridge. They've been lobbying quite hard to be allowed to take low-level AUKUS nuclear waste at that facility in Sandy Ridge. The Chandler facility that they're proposing to build just outside Titchikala, 120 kilometers south of Alice Springs, is very different to that Sandy Ridge facility. The Chandler facility would be built in a salt formation. They're proposing to build it up to 850 meters underground. And you just don't go to that level of expenditure and engineering to build what up to this date they've described variously as a salt mine, and now they're on record as saying that they would like to take low-level nuclear waste at that facility. But again, when those sorts of facilities have been constructed overseas, they're only ever constructed to store high-level nuclear waste, to the best of my knowledge. And TELUS, I guess perhaps this project came across my radar when TELUS hired a US military contractor called Amentum. Amentum is an enormous global company operating in 80 countries or something, has 53,000 personnel. I've since learnt that it is responsible for managing 90% of the nuclear waste related to the US Department of Energy and Department of Defense in the US. So it's really like the only military contractor capable of dealing with nuclear waste at that scale. They also manage Pine Gap. They basically manage the day-to-day operations at Pine Gap. They have offices just in the middle of town in Alice Springs. Our former mayor worked full-time for them at the same time as he was mayor. They were contracted to conduct a strategic review of this project. And they previously managed a nuclear waste facility in the US that stored excess plutonium from the US's nuclear weapons program. It's a facility called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico, which is about 650 meters underground in a salt formation. So yeah, that's really puts that facility on the map as potentially where the Australian government would like to store nuclear waste. Amentum, I've seen, is now like a sponsor of the Australian Submarine Institute, I think it is, and have recently been, I think, been lobbying to manage nuclear waste and to maintain nuclear submarines outside Fremantle at the facilities in Western Australia. Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff in the Northern Territory, a lot of other like US facilities that I think are sort of the result of things that have come well before AUKUS, but are still, just as concerning. There is something like 3 or 4 basically war rehearsals that happen annually or biannually in the top end. There's Pitch Black, which I think is happening on on July 20th. I'll speak more about July 20th in a moment. And there is the Talisman Sabre war rehearsals that happen biannually. Basically, those war rehearsals happen over 3 or 4 defense lands that are former pastoral stations One of them that I've sort of focused on is called the Bradshaw Field. It's in the Kimberleys, on the Northern Territory side of the Kimberleys. Bradshaw was basically a frontier genocidaire and land speculator, who was responsible for frontier massacres. And yeah, it seems really telling that this facility where the war, or this field where the war rehearsals happen, continues to be called the Bradshaw Field. There's certainly like a very similar terra nullius sort of logic that gets deployed for why these things should happen across Northern Australia. You get like the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Talks a lot about how that's our sort of what the Northern Territory has to offer, is that we have these vast, open, uninhabited spaces where controversial military activities that cannot happen in Japan or in South Korea or in the US can happen without prying eyes, the same kind of scrutiny that they would be subject to in those other places. It's becoming, I guess, especially after the Iran war, it's really becoming clear that US bases all across the Pacific region are not safe, and the US military planners increasingly recognize this, are investing more in Northern Australia as a place from which to launch attacks if they decide they really want to go to war with China. The Northern Australia was the top location for overseas US military construction spending last year. So I don't know, there's a lot to say about what's happening with US and Australian military buildup across Northern Australia. Perhaps, I guess, while I was here on the topic of July 20, I wanted to spruik that we're having this convergence on Pine Gap that is happening from the 18th to the 20th of July. Bantua for Palestine and a group called the Anti-Militarist Action Network are coordinating that. I guess we've seen like a huge amount of a really heartening mobilization across the continent over the last. I mean, on the one hand, it's very heartening. It's patently inadequate as well. A mobilization in response to the genocide and in response to Western participation in the genocide in Gaza. It's been really great to see the way, activists all across sort of the Eastern Seaboard in particular and other regions have skilled up on the weapons factories in their regions and neighborhoods and cities and learnt exactly what's being produced there, and attempted to disrupt the supply chains for those weapons facilities. I guess we really want to draw attention to the role of Pine Gap in that genocide, as well as in, violence across West Asia, the war of aggression on Iran, and future, whatever comes next, as well as what I just described, all of those military facilities across Northern Australia and the way they, sort of perpetuate terra nullius across Northern Australia, and cause a whole lot of environmental and social harms. So we would love for people across the continent to come to Alice Springs across those dates. You can register for the event at closepinegap.org.au. And maybe finally, I'd just like to say Nick is representing me and my comrade Yul in court in a couple of months for blocking the road into the Pine Gap facility last year. And just like to say, Nick's work has just been incredible, and we're so grateful that Nick is prepared to represent us. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Jorgen, and thank you for being the eyes and ears on the ground and informing us of what is happening in the top end. And I think it has to be said that nuclear waste, as far as I understand,
Oh, shut up.
whoops, we'll just mute that. It cannot be safely stored underground, and I understand the particular sensitivities for the traditional owners of the land. And the impact that AUKUS has on them because of these remote areas that you're talking about. And congratulations on your activism and appearing in AUKUS command documents. And again, yes, thanks to Nick for doing the work for you. I know we're running out of time, but I do want to hear from the three other activists so we can get a sense again of what's happening on the ground. And I'll probably then do a quick summing up because I think we're going to be beaten by time in terms of a lot of questions. And I take full responsibility for that, but look at what we've unearthed over a period of sort of 2 hours. I think that's been remarkable and tangible information. I'll now hand over to Eileen Darley from the Port Adelaide Community. I think it's the Port Adelaide Community Opposes AUKUS group. Eileen is an anti-AUKUS activist on the ground where AUKUS submarine activities are taking place or proposed or expected to take place. So thank you, Eileen, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. You might have to unmute, Eileen.
What shocks me the most is that, we just really have no idea.
Do we have Eileen?
People are just like, what's the...
I have unmuted myself a couple of times. I keep getting muted, so I'm here.
Thanks, Eileen.
Okay, so I guess this part of the webinar is about just a quick snapshot from some of the grassroots groups around the country who are campaigning at the pointy end of AUKUS, where the facilities already are or will be in the near future. So as Kelly said, I'm the coordinator of Port Adelaide Community Opposing AUKUS, or PACOA, which has been in existence since about 2024, sometime after the announcement was made, without any consultation, of course, needless to say, with the local community, that our local naval shipyards would be the site to construct the SSN AUKUS nuclear submarines. And you'll have no doubt heard of the Osborne facility. And it's a facility, I just want to point out, that's going ahead at a gobsmacking rate. So even though nobody believes that we're going to be constructing these nuclear submarines at all, our question is, what the hell is the facility for? Because they're pumping $30 billion into it. And every time you go up there, the footprint has expanded considerably. But first, I just want to give you a picture of the community that we're talking about, because I guess we want this to be really linked to the effects on people in a very concrete way. Port Adelaide, we call it the port or we call it the peninsula, but it's a place that's been really heavily shaped by its Kaurna history, and a river with an abundant food source, a highly culturally significant place for the Kaurna people. And it's also been shaped by its militant maritime history. So it was the place of the 1928 waterside workers' strike, the Beef March, and a whole lot of other major, significant working class histories. So it also maintains some of that flavour. It's still got somewhat of a village-like kind of community hanging on in the face of gentrification and the brutal destruction of the local heritage by developers, which is a process which is really being accelerated by AUKUS arriving in the area. So while some of the suburbs of the peninsula are reasonably well heeled, the suburbs like Taparoo and Osborne, which are immediately adjacent to the naval shipyards, are anything but. And I really want to invite you to envisage, for those of you that don't know the area, that this nuclear facility is literally across a main road and just down the way from where 30,000 people live. There are considerable pockets of public housing. There's a lower than average household income and a lot of poverty, making the obscene billions that they're spending on AUKUS grate even more with our local community. And I'm sure this is one of the reasons it's class demographic, that is, and also it's being a safe Labor seat, that the local community's been treated with such disrespect and basically being ambushed by the big announcement Premier Malinauskas, we call him Malinauskas around here, and Defence Minister Miles. So the federal government has rammed through their laws to make Osborne a designated zone and set their regulator to override, we only learnt this recently, no less than 31 state laws, including, incredibly, the Work Health and Safety Act. And then they've treated us to a few carrots in the form of spruiking a training and skills academy and the promise of big shiny jobs for the kids of the peninsula in the war industry. So most of these kids are not going, most of these jobs are not going to materialise as they disappear offshore, or the AUKUS visa that they want so badly heralds more nuke submarine workers from the UK and engineers from interstate, leaving our kids with security, canteen and cleaning jobs, low paid, bad conditions. So the truth of the Osborne facility for our local community is the same as the secret New South Wales government report from 2023 that was revealed the other day about Port Kembla. That is, that every nuclear submarine facility carries with it the devastating risks of becoming a target in the event of war, privy to nuclear accidents, and a threat, this is in their terms, their words, a threat to the amenity of the area. And I think that's a very cute way of saying that your house price is going to plummet because you're living next to a nuclear reactor. So at present, the chances of conflict, as we all know, where Australia at best is going to be a launch pad for a war, with the US war with China, or at worst, proxy, are very real, leaving a great big target on our backs. And where even in the construction phase of the subs, if we get them, rather than simply being a host site for the maintenance and servicing of US ones, which is what we think is going to be happening, we will have to be storing nuclear waste that requires safe storage for 300 years. I see that Margie Beavis is here, and thank her for all the work that she did to teach us about what we had in store for us. And then, of course, there's the potential of being a gateway for a national nuclear dump with the most toxic substance known to humankind, trucked through our streets and stored for 10,000 years on First Nations land somewhere up north. So PCOA will have no alternative but to keep producing our leaflets, expanding our reach, running our public meetings and rallies and cultural nights and so on, as well as coordinating with our sister orgs across the country and with the Australian Anti-AUKUS Coalition. So if you live in South Australia, please reach out. I'll put our email in the list. And also, I just want to say, this is our latest. We decided that we were going to have a leaflet specifically on jobs because we think that that's the only argument that the government is winning, because we live in a community that desperately needs jobs. And so our leaflet really emphasises all the things that we could actually be investing in with a fraction of the money that they're wasting and pouring into the US and UK submarine programs, that really would provide local people with good, lasting jobs for life and not death. Thanks, everyone. Oh, and I'm going to pass on now to the indefatigable Leonie Lundy from Stop AUKUS WA, who really, well, they really are at the pointy end of all of this. So over to you, Leonie.
Thanks, Arlene. Kaya to everybody from Wajak Noongar Boodja. To situate our main WA campaign focus, I've uploaded a link in the chat to a map of Cockburn Sound, which is a 25-kilometre stretch taking in HMAS Stirling on Meander, Garden Island, opposite Rockingham, and where the AUKUS SRF West rotations will be based, and the home port for Australia's own nuclear-powered submarines, not that we believe they'll ever arrive. The new Henderson Defence Precinct is to the north, which will include a dry dock for nuclear-powered submarine depot level maintenance and a temporary storage site for radioactive waste, the same as Stirling. A major concern is if and when the US will have access to this. At the top of the sound is Fremantle, where we still have, thankfully, a nuclear-free policy. We campaign across the four local government areas against AUKUS and under the banner, Keep Cockburn Sound Nuclear Free. I'll focus mainly on protesting, I think, given time. So we protest at major events in Perth, university campuses, Defence Westbrooks and Fremantle. But the prime protest site is obviously the gates to HMAS Stirling. To date, we've had no problem being able to march there, even with police escort. We can do photo ops and speak outs without a problem as long as we don't try and encroach, obviously, beyond the main gate. And we have good relations with the three levels of security for now, HMAS Base, WA Police and the Australian Federal Police. The AUKUS command apparently visited us at a couple of our protests. We think we know who they were. The unit accompanies the berthing of the US and UK sub-visits to Stirling. Its presence is still small, but obviously this will increase or ramp up in the 2027 with the rotations. And importantly, we're taking the security of the radioactive waste facilities. Nuclear security is a must, as Rex said. Skylarking jet skiers are rampant for a start in that area. Recently, the phrase risk of container weaponization was coined in reference to the largely Chinese-owned container ships to use the nearby Kwinana Outer Harbour. The subs amazingly share the same channel in Cockburn Sound. Alarming also is the close proximity to the Kwinana toxic industry, which includes ammonia nitrate storage. Time doesn't permit covering here our tracking of the Harold Holt Base and air bases in the north and difficulties in protesting there, but happy to take questions. Re the creep of anti-protest legislation, just as concerning for us in WA, apart from the AUKUS command, are two bills currently before the WA Parliament. One, the Criminal Code Amendment Post and Boast Offence Bill is pending return to Parliament for debate. If passed, the post and boast offences would make it illegal to disseminate material, including social media posts, that shows certain criminal offences if it encourages others to engage in the same or similar conduct or to glorify it. This includes offences that protesters are commonly charged with, such as trespass and disorderly behaviour in public. The second is the Public Order Legislation Amendment Bill. If passed, police will consider public safety above all else when determining protest permit applications and would be given expanded powers to refuse a protest permit if it is considered it may cause animosity towards or harassment of a person or group of persons on a range of grounds, including race or ethno-religious origin. In provision, the new Right to Protest WA group has an event launch fundraiser early in June. We're also part of the new WA Anti-War Collective to widen our anti-militarism work. Time will tell if anti-US subs, bases, slogans and chants could be caught up under the offences relating to racial harassment and inciting racial genocide. Meanwhile, we just got a protest permit for a key time and place at the Indian Ocean Defence and Security Conference and Exhibition next week, and have the land forces coming up in October at a cost of, cop it, 11.4 million for security alone. And we'll be down at Stirling Gates to unwelcome the next US Virginia-class nuke-powered sub. I'll leave it there and hand over to Peter Rathborne from Wollongong Against War and Nukes, Wawan. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, look, I think I'm not going to talk about any of the detail that's been covered already, but just talk about the group that we've built in Wollongong around not just anti-AUKUS work, but as Arthur explained, when the government said we're not going to announce which port will become the base, a lot of our work went very quiet. People went, oh, well, it's not going to happen. It's not going to be here. We don't need to worry about it. There's no announcement. What's going on? People didn't know about it. At that point, we looked at orienting more generally as an anti-war and anti-nuclear group, which is why we're known as Wollongong Against War and Nukes. This kept us busy building a group through opposition to Dutton's nuclear power proposals and a range of other activities, and in general, looking at in particular, the war on Gaza. We hosted Mazen Kumsaya at an event in Wollongong when he visited from Bethlehem and spoke about some of the environmental impact of the colonial settler state. We operate basically at a very grassroots level, where we work with a range of people with different politics, but on the basis that we don't spend time arguing about differences. We have a minimal platform and a united front, and we work together extraordinarily well with no sectarianism, and it's a very effective group. We see that the connection to broader struggles for peace and social justice are critical to us, and in fact are critical politically to building an understanding that it's not actually just about not in our backyard, but it's actually about the state of the world, Australia's role in capitalist ventures, in imperialism in the region, and connections with the United States for those reasons. We've managed to find some quite adventurous opportunities to explore activism. Last year, we had a 3-week residency at the Wollongong Art Gallery, where we had studio space as activists, and we were able to talk to people who came in to do silk screening with us, badge making, and a whole range of things, which just broadened the audience for us tremendously. We operate with monthly meetings and a monthly newsletter we set up quite early in the piece. And that's been critical for us to pull together once a month some of the ideas that have circulating, trying to analyze what's going on, but also to talk about actions that have happened and make reports on those and advertise what's coming up. We engage with things like the Wollongong Friends of Palestine and the Bisalloy pickets, which people may be aware of, is a steel manufacturer that supplies the IDF with steel. And there's been a number of very successful pickets of that, community pickets of it, where it's shut down for quite a number of days at a time. I think, given the 3 minutes that I've got to talk, I should just say what we're actually doing now is we're looking at connecting to things like the environment movement. So last year we went to Rising Tide. We managed to get a platform there with the MUA transition officer and the Teachers Fed and actually talk about, you know, environment and war and AUKUS. This year we're working very hard around the Earth's Greatest Enemy screening, which we've managed to get Abby Martin to come to us in Wollongong, and we feel very privileged to have got that. And so in the run-up to that, on the 31st of May, we've organised an anti-war Enviro Fest, which has 3 bands, 2 choirs, silk screening, stalls at a venue in Port Kembla, and that will be the launching post for our Earth's Greatest Enemy support work. And so, you know, go to our website, stopthesubs.org, sign up to our newsletter. You'll see what we're up to. And if you're anywhere near Sydney or Port Kembla, come down on the 31st. And I thank you for your time tonight.
I think we're throwing very quickly to Linda from the Hunter Peace Group. Linda, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thanks, Linda.
Well, Newcastle has always been a very anti-war, anti-nuclear, pro-peace town, and kind of died off when we lost all our industry between the 80s and the 90s, and the unions were crushed and everything. So our peace movement kind of fell apart. However, 10 years ago, the Hunter Peace Group decided that we needed to move and start protesting against nuclear bombs. ICANN was very strong, trying to get the treaty treaty against nuclear prohibition on nuclear weapons. And so we started there. And from there, we've kind of gone through to the AUKUS thing. We were appalled that we were getting nuclear, the possibility of nuclear, any kind of nuclear submarine here in Australia. And we have been protesting quite continuously against such a thing. And in Newcastle, we feel that the AUKUS footprint is very big here, because we have had the expansion of our RAF base. We've got extreme militarization of our education system. We have got a massive amount of defense industries that have been created. And we have got the Port of Newcastle that was supposed to be getting some kind of expansion things done. Everything seems to have died. And we've got also got the the missile production facility that's being built up near the airport. We've got lots of armaments companies around our airport that the university works very closely with in researching their STEM students and so on. I suppose you could look on the bright side for the workers, because there's many of our tradesmen who had been unemployed for a long time. They now have work, but sadly it's in defence industries. There was a recent report which mentioned Newcastle. This sounds like we're competing against Port Kembla for who's going to get the submarine base, but it's not meant that way. So this report said about Newcastle that arising from Procos Forum, from coal to steel to submarines, developing defence precincts, missile production facilities, planned high-speed rail link to Sydney, and it could mean that by 2040, Newcastle could host the advanced naval operations and industrial innovation, transforming connectivity and regional economic growth. And apparently, too, they've decided that they could quite easily, we have a problem at the mouth of the harbour, but they reckon they could just put in a sea mine and open that up for a track for the submarines to come in. So we hope none of that's going to happen, but that's what we're campaigning against very strongly. We're trying to educate the community. We're holding forums. We're leafleting. At every opportunity, we're talking about this possibility. And of course, we're very appalled at the militarization of our education system. As far as protesting against the anti-protest law in New South Wales, which have been expanded or rewritten here in New South Wales, as have the police powers exercise. Recent anti-protest acts of the 2022 and 2025, and under the Public Assembly Restrictions Declarations, PARD, allow, among other things, police to restrict assemblies, ban protests for up to 3 months, impose larger fines and imprisonments. In April 2026, however, these laws were ruled unconstitutional due to their impact on protest, although restrictions remain roads and infrastructure. Newcastle saw numerous arrests under the new laws, especially the climate change activists protesting at the port, the Rising Tide people who did a wonderful job, especially climate activists protesting at the port. Many faced charges under the Crimes Act, carrying penalties up to 2 years jail and $22,000 fines. The Newcastle court has now made it clear that this was a profligate waste of time and resources. Test cases continue. However, Rising Tide's legal team recently succeeded in getting charges dismissed for 4 protesters and winning $73,000 in costs. This is quite marvellous, and they're hoping that they will repeat this later on in the year when they're running another test case. The laws are insidious. The fact that we can lose our freedom to speak, our freedom to protest in any way except violently, I don't agree with that. But we're really becoming a police state, a militarized country, and a nuclearized country, it seems, is the wish. And it's very, very sad and very, very bad for the future. That's all I have to say. We must not give up on the fight. And thank you, everybody, for tonight. I hand back to you, Kelly, for Q&A, but I don't think we've got time.
Thank you, Linda. No, we don't have time, but I'll just do a very quick sum up and I'll let Shirley put up some slides. I think we actually need, if at all possible, I might just get you to mute, Linda, if you don't mind, just so that you can adjust you. Yep, you're right. We actually need a transcript of this evening because I'm just so heartened by the information that's being flushed out. particularly at that local level. Leonie, I'd be really interested to know whether, when you're attending your protests, whether they'll let you, whether they'll let a drone go over the area, and whether you're able to, whether that's sort of a stretch too far. I'd be interested to see sort of what AUKUS Command does in that respect. But look, I think what is very clear is politicians know there's little public support for AUKUS, which is why they're hiding everything, and they're not telling anyone anything. But they need reminding that we have a democratic right to be vocal in our opposition to this uni-party conspiracy against the interests of the Australian people. It is also self-evident from this evening that people are on the ground are making links. They're seeing patterns and they're working collectively, which is so important in terms of unraveling the AUKUS project. And unless we act collectively now, there's absolutely no chance of unraveling AUKUS. So it's up to each and every one of us to make our concerns known. What we all and you need to do, I don't need to give any advice to the incredible activists we have online this evening, but is to stay well informed about AUKUS and its potential consequences, disseminate that information as widely as you can, even if just telling your friends, and organise or join in with strategic protests that have good advice from the likes of people like Nick and his organisations before that action takes place, that enhances public understanding of the risks and the costs being thrust upon us all and for generations. And to help you do that, I'll hand over to Shirley, because we're now on 8:43. We could pull an all-nighter on AUKUS, but I'm sure we've got other things we need to get done this evening. And Shirley is from the Australia Anti-AUKUS Coalition, who will direct you to upcoming events and provide you with a list of all the other anti-AUKUS groups around the country, which is amazing. This is happening nationwide to help you get involved. And I want to thank you all and the panelists, Nick, Rex, David. We've got, we've got Linda, Peter, Leonie, Eileen, Jorgen. I hope I pronounced your name properly at that time, Jorgen. And I hope I haven't missed out on anybody there. I think Arthur, how could I forget Arthur? But I want to thank you for the insights and information from this evening. I know that I've made copious notes. I'll hand you back to Shirley, and I wish you all the best moving forward with the activism on AUKUS and other matters. Thank you so much. Have we got you there, Shirley?
There we go.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
Okay, great. I'm going to make this as short as possible. It is getting late, but we've still got over 200 people hanging in there. So it's an indication of the strength and concern about AUKUS and the anti-democratic laws that are being ushered in. So I'll just go very briefly over. First, I want to thank, on behalf of the Australian Anti-AUKUS Coalition, webinar organising group. There's a group of us that's part of the AAAC. We want to thank Kelly for emceeing and drawing together the many AUKUS threads running through this webinar. And as usual, Kelly has done a tremendous job in bringing all that together. So big claps for Kelly, I think. Thank you to all the speakers, David, Rex, Nick, Arthur, Jorgen, and for giving your time, and Kelly, obviously, for giving your time to this webinar and deepening the awareness and helping us to strengthen and empower the growing movement against AUKUS and the end to the US military alliance. and the militarization of this country. And of course, the AUKUS command, which we really need to view in the context of overall attacks on civil rights and democratic rights in this country. And I think we need to make that connection whenever we do talk about AUKUS command and when we do talk about other areas of attacks on democratic rights. We need to put it all in perspective. So, and also thanks to all the grassroots activists who made their presentations, and they're resisting their community, or their communities are resisting being turned into basically a US military base. And Australia is now being turned into the whole of the nation, country, is being turned into US military base. And I think that's also an aspect that the way we organise, we should be guided by that, by that outlook in seeing our country as a US base, military base. So thank you to all the audience who came, to 265 who came. We had 670 who had registered, 265, 66 attended, which is quite a considerable number. And, over 200 are still here with us. So I just want to go over just a little bit into the aim of this, what the aim of this webinar has been. So the aim of this webinar is to strengthen national mobilisation and build solidarity against AUKUS, nuclear submarines, and the US military in Australia across the country. So that's where our strength lies. Our strength lies in building that solidarity with each community and each anti-AUKUS group that are at the moment are basically struggling on their own. And we need to, our strength lies, as Kelly said, our strength lies in doing things collectively, to being a collective. One of the things that we're going to do, some of the things that we are going to strengthen, is to establish a proper liaison group with representatives from local anti-AUKUS community groups within the AAAC to coordinate, communicate and build solidarity, to share the information, national coordination and mutual support network. We're also calling for a National Day of Action on Sunday, the 20th of September, which is the International Day for Peace. So we're proposing that day, the September the 20th, we're calling for mobilisation against AUKUS and against the militarisation of Australia and US bases. So I really want to finish very quickly, but we do have an update. We have a list of all the community anti-AUKUS organisations around the country. We're having some problems with sharing sharing the screen. So if all the participants in this webinar, and also all those who had registered, will get in the next few days, or over next week, we'll get a contact list for all the organisation anti-AUKUS groups around Australia. Also, what the aims and objectives of the anti-AUKUS coalition, the upcoming events, which obviously includes the IPANS National Conference in Adelaide on the 25th, 26th of July, which will be a really important conference, that it will consolidate a lot of the discussion that we are having here. And also the upcoming screening of Abby Martin's film, The Earth's Greatest Enemy. So all that information we will be sending to all those who have registered. I think the 670 who had registered. So we're urging people to get involved in the campaign, join your local anti-AUKUS group. And if there is no a local anti-AUKUS group, contact either AAAC, the Australian Anti-AUKUS Coalition, or IPAN, and we will help you, assist we're setting up a local community group. The other thing that I think that we will be promoting is to support communities fighting funds in defence of democratic rights, and that's going to be quite significant and important. And we think that each state will need to develop a process where we do develop that defend democratic rights funds. So thank you again for coming, and it's been a great pleasure to have Kelly and all the speakers, and I certainly gained a lot out of this webinar, as I think everybody else has as well. So please continue working. Please join the Anti-AUKUS Coalition and develop your own local community groups. Yeah.
Thank you and good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Right. No AUKUS.
No AUKUS.
No AUKUS. Thank you.
End AUKUS.
End AUKUS now.
No AUKUS.
Wrap AUKUS.
No AUKUS.
No US.
AUKUS, not AUKUS.
No AUKUS.
No AUKUS.
Yeah.
End
And
the
free
US
Palestine.
alliance. Up
No
with the US
AUKUS.
alliance. Get out of the Americans.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks, everyone.
No,
Thank you.
good night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. No AUKUS.
Thank you.
AUKUS.
No AUKUS.
Where's there?
Hey Shirley, I actually didn't realize you wanted those up while you were talking.
Oh, that's all right. That's okay. It was, that went up, so that's the main thing. So
Yeah.
that's all right. But thanks for that. That was really good doing that.
All good. Yeah, that's great. So I'll stop sharing. I stop record. Recording. Yes. Yeah, no, well done. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, good.
So it's another step, isn't it? It's